welcome to the show with me, Mike Cavalli, and my very special guest, Jeremy Old. Jeremy runs the website worldpeacegroup.org. He's also the author of the book, The Super Radiance Effect. This is an extraordinary positive effect radiated to the rest of society by a group of specially trained meditators. This unique effect only takes place when a sufficient number of these meditators form a group to practice meditation together at the same time on a daily basis. So, well, I'll tell you what, we won't really waste any more time with me talking about it all. Let's go over and welcome Jeremy. Jeremy, welcome.
It's very nice to be here, Mike. Thank you.
Well, thank you for coming today. We just mentioned off air there that there was forces here trying to stop us from getting together, but we managed it. Thank God. Anyway, let's just begin. What is the super radiance effect, first of all?
Right. It's difficult to describe, really, because you can't see it, you can't touch it, you can't feel it. Right. But nevertheless, it does exist, and we can measure it by the effect that it has on the rest of society. But in simple terms, it's when enough people practice an advanced form of transcendental meditation. We call it the TM-Siddhi program. Right. If they do it together and at the same time, then they have a radiated effect on the rest of society. And it's so consistent and so predictable that we know that the actual numbers required in a meditating group to have a particular effect on the rest of society. So the formula used is the square root of 1%.
Right.
So, for instance, for a country like the United Kingdom, with about 60 million people, we need about 750, 800 these TM Siddhas meditating together at the same time in a group, all in one place, and that'll have a radiated effect on the rest of society. And then if you measure the effect, you can use publicly available statistics, right, such as, for instance, the crime rate. You'll see crime rates begin to dip. Where these meditators have been used in war zones, there's usually almost an immediate cessation of violence and war deaths. Right. But in normal terms, we see terrorist incidents go down quite substantially by about 70%. We see accident and emergency, people being sent to hospital in a hurry, that reduces considerably. A whole range of different statistics, which are fascinating, really.
Right, and it just takes 750 people as a minimum.
Yeah.
Right. And so, for example, do you when you do this, is it a particular outcome that you're looking for? So would you focus on, let's just take, for example, the government wanted to fluoridate the whole of the United Kingdom with water, and
yes,
we don't think it's a good idea. Do we focus on clean water?
Yeah.
And that's it?
Yeah. Okay. No, we don't focus on any particular outcome. Right. What we're doing when we're in a group is what's called the TM-Siddhi program. So it's right, a special type of meditation. And what we're doing is settling down to a very deep level.
Right.
And resting our minds and our physiologies to a level where we are touching on the sort of absolute essence of life. Right. And at that point, we are able to enliven it using the Siddhi program. Right. And what we're doing is enlivening the basis of the whole of nature. So it's like whatever's good improves and whatever isn't so good starts to decline. So it might be, I don't know, a matter of opinion whether fluoridation is good or bad. Sure, yeah. So we're hoping nature knows best, and and the results will follow. I mean, I'll give you an example that many times in the past, where there's been a national group in a country or another, you've seen the stock market go up. Okay. Right. Yeah. So, okay, that's good. Everyone's, gets wealthier and lots more money around. But one can imagine that in a situation where the stock market was already overheated, mm-hmm, and it was too high already, you probably see it start to come down. Right. So wouldn't like to make predictions as to exactly what's going to happen. But, universally, we think people getting killed in a war are bad.
Of course.
So I find, where these groups have been in war zones, it's actually almost immediate. As soon as the group arrives, the fighting stops. It's you can set your watch by it. It's that predictable. It's not.
Right. Wow. So what would be the process then? I mean, so what would be the thinking? Because at some level you'd have to decide, well, we really think war's a bad idea, actually. I mean, that's just the general consensus. So there'd have to be some kind of intent, would there?
Well, yes, to form a group in the first place. I think that if... I did give you an example. A few years back now, back in the early 90s, I was part of a small group that went to Croatia. The civil war had erupted there. Right. It was the beginning of the breakup of Yugoslavia. Mm-hmm. Slovenia, I think, had been recognised as an independent state, but Croatia hadn't, so they were fighting over it, and it was beginning to look like it was really going to get out of control, as it did in Bosnia later on, and other parts of Yugoslavia. It became very, very nasty. Now, we were invited over there, I seem to remember, by Croatian Chamber of Commerce or someone, but they paid for our hotel accommodation, and we arrived. Now, obviously, our intention to go there was to calm the thing down. Right. But when we're there, we just do the program. We don't do any special, chants or incantations or anything like that. We just do our program. Mm. And what we're doing when we're doing our program is enlivening nature throughout the rest of society. Mm. So when we got to the point, actually, as soon as we arrived, the fighting stopped in the town that we were in. Right. Not that there was any real fighting there, but the night we arrived, they were expecting an air raid. Right. And we arrived at the hotel, and all the lights were out. It was a bit eerie. There were just candles in reception, and we just sort of disappeared off to our rooms and started to meditate straight away. Well, I'm going to take any risks. But it also underlines my point that it is very predictable. I remember... fax came through to where I was with this invitation. I just thought, God, got to go. It just did not occur to me that actually what I was doing was rather risky. Right. And because I didn't think it was risky, and I don't feel it is risky, because I've got that understanding that it works. But I have to say, when we crossed the border, we were coming from Italy in a minibus. There were about 15 of us in this little minibus, and the car in front was stopped by the border guards, and the guy was told to get out of his car, and they were all armed and everything, Right. But then border guards often are. But he was told to undo his boots, and they opened it up, and it was just stuffed with weapons. They could see them. And they thought it was great. They were patting him on the back. He was bringing more toys to the party. So off he went, and then we drove up, and he said, "What are you doing here?" We said, "We're tourists." We couldn't say anything else. Thought we were mad and just let us through. But it did make me realise, actually, some people are taking this rather seriously. So we arrived at the hotel, and there was supposed to be an air raid that night. Being a civil war, everyone knew what was going to happen next, And there were 20 air raids that night in Croatia, but not in our town. It just didn't happen. Wow. So we had enough people for that environment, and it took a while. It took 3 or 4 weeks for the group to build to a size where it met the Super Radiance number for the whole of Croatia. I'm afraid offhand I can't remember what that is. I think it's about 300 people, but I can't remember.
That isn't very much, is it?
No, it was enough just to stop it. Yeah. And as the group grew, you saw the effect growing. Actually, on my website, I've got a journal of my time there, because I was, again, it was a very weird situation. You're getting Time magazine and the Times newspaper and BBC reports and every day, so you saw what was happening
Right.
Around the countryside, and our effect grew as the numbers grew.
Right.
Quite amazing to watch.
And oops, excuse me, I just lost my little thing there. That's better. If you was to get the numbers straight away and you exceed the numbers, so I think you said you needed 350, was it 350 you had it in Croatia?
Yeah, I can't remember the
Yeah.
numbers.
Well,
You know what the population is, just
yeah,
work.
yeah,
It might have only been 250 people. It's a very small country, so it
yeah.
was, yeah.
So if you, for example, flood the country, say in the case of Croatia, say with 1,000 people,
Yeah, yeah.
does it? Is the process quicker?
Well, you can't get more quick than
No. In
24
the,
hours. I mean,
yeah,
the
yeah,
original slogan on my website was "World Peace in 24 hours." You know,
right,
so,
yeah, yeah,
we could do it in 12, maybe.
right,
It sounds preposterous, but the fact is, the effect is immediate.
mm,
If you had 1,000 people, it would have sort of flattened the violence across the whole of Yugoslavia. I would have thought. So for instance, if you had 750, 800 for Britain, but if you add in another 500 or 600, you would then be helping the whole of Europe. Actually, I think you probably need 2,000 for the whole of Europe.
really,
Sorry, I don't have figures offhand. Yeah, so that's all you need. So the bigger the group,
yeah,
the wider the expanse. So for a country the size of the UK, okay, 750. For America, which is 5 or 6 times bigger,
mm,
you actually only need about 1,500 people.
right,
So for the whole world, which is 7 billion people, we need about 8,000 people, 8,000 TM SIDA. So
wow,
it's, the impact is disproportionate as it gets
yeah,
bigger and bigger. That's one of the fantastic things about it.
sure.
So every extra person you get on the group is more powerful than
Yeah,
the person before them. It's quite amazing,
wow,
actually. You find in other groups, the bigger the group, the less important the last person is in. But in our groups, the last person in is the most important person in
sure,
it,
yeah,
the
yeah,
most valuable. They're having the
yeah,
biggest effect, and
right,
it's fun to work out. Sort of think, oh, how many people am I helping? So, big group. I'm helping at least 20,000 people.
yeah, yeah.
It's great.
I wonder if you could tell us. We spoke about it off air the other week about the experience in Berlin and the Velvet Curtain. Is that something you
Oh,
can
yes.
talk about?
Well, at that time, this was it 89, 1989? A year or so earlier, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who's the founder of
Yeah,
Transcendental Meditation and has been teaching people the TM technique, and for those who want to do it, the TM City program for all these years. Prior to that, he'd had a few experiments where he'd sent groups into particular hotspots. Nicaragua was one, Cambodia was another, Rhodesia. You remember the civil war in
yeah,
Rhodesia back
yeah,
it was 80s or 70s, and I think he began to think that no, actually, people have got to be self-sufficient.
mm,
Countries have got to provide their own. We can't send people all over the world all the
right,
time. We haven't got the resources for it. We haven't got the
sure,
means to it,
yeah,
and so he started developing a global group in India. And the way he was doing it, he was training pundits in the Vedic science, which is the source of TM.
right,
And part of his life's work was reviving the Vedic tradition and finding all the Vedas and renewing them and freshening them up. And of course, he has to train the pundits who are the sort of caretakers, custodians.
sure,
I went over to India on a course there, and I was there for a few months back in '88. And by that time, he'd already had 2,000 pundits, boy pundits. They're all training up, and you could hear them chanting, and very, very powerful effect. Now, about a year or so later, he managed to achieve the global Super Radiance group.
okay,
So in those days, about 7,000 people, 7,000 pundits or 7,000 siddhas. And at that time, wars everywhere stopped. So one particularly been going on about 25 years in Mozambique, just came to an end. More to that as well, because President Gisano actually formed his own groups. But what started to happen was the Soviet Union began to, get rocky. And at that time, TM was introduced into Moscow. And I think they taught about 100,000 people, as far as I remember. It was a real rush job. Hundreds of TM teachers were over there. And what happened is it just dissolved the communist system. That sort of unnatural alien way of behavior was no longer supported by nature, and it just crashed overnight. I mean, it took, weeks, didn't it? Just weeks. Yeah. And it was totally unexpected elsewhere. None of the usual Western pundits understood what was going on. They just thought it was some sort of freak incident, really. But what was happening was, apart from his 7,000 group, he placed teams of Siddhars in groups around what he called the Velvet Curtain. So that the Iron Curtain across Europe, which was East Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Austria. So he'd put people in Germany and Austria and places like that to be as close as possible to the Soviet Union and radiate super radiance across the border. Right. And that's how it collapsed. It's all very silent, nobody knows anything about it. It was great fun to be part of it. I mean, I was in England at the time, but he gave us hugely long meditation programs to do at the time, and we seemed to spend most of the day doing it, and I'm sure that's what they were doing in the rest of Europe. So there was no chance the Soviet Union was going to survive.
No. I'm quite surprised that the Soviet Union allowed you in. I would have thought their research would have suggested otherwise.
There was you remember Dr. Chopra? I mean, he's still around, but he was very close to Maharishi in those days, and Maharishi sent him across to Moscow because they had they wanted a lecture on Vedic science and transcendental meditation at the Soviet Academy of Sciences. And so he went in there, and he's a great speaker, and he blew them away with this idea. And they decided, right, I tell you what we'll do. We want to test this, see if this is any good. Let's put your money where your mouth is. Right. Let's teach. And they got some campus, some university campus or research campus. I can't remember whether it was 2,000 of them or whether it was two groups of 2,000. But anyway, they split it down the middle. They said, right, one lot will learn TM and the other lot won't. Okay, right. And we'll see what the benefits are to all the people who learned, and if the others are missing out. So it worked so well that the experiment broke down because the control group, the people who weren't meditating, refused to carry on. They wanted to learn to meditate because they saw the benefits everyone else was experiencing. So it broke down. But the Academy of Sciences said to the Soviet authorities, look, this is something we should have in this country because it was an atheist country, don't allow religions and all this. This is scientific and therefore it's okay. And I think the Soviets were often experimenting with things like this. They sort of had a better understanding, funnily enough, that actually this could possibly help, So they allowed it in there, and Maharishi didn't need to be asked twice. He has sent hundreds of teachers over, and people were queuing up because they had 60 years of terror, hadn't they, and subjugation, and it was just a fantastic release. And there's some wonderful stories of people learning and changing their lives because at last they're getting some relief from purgatory that they were in. But of course, that softened up the whole atmosphere in Soviet Union as well. So that on top of the World Peace Group. I'm sorry, that's not my World Peace Group. That's just the name of my, Maharishi's World Peace Group and his Velvet Curtain.
Right. And what happened in Berlin with the falling of the wall?
Well, that was just part of it. I mean,
it was part. Yeah.
Yeah, we weren't there taking the bricks away or anything like that, but it just created this wonderful uprising, really, a peaceful uprising, and the guards were just watching it all happen and just allowed it to dismantle. With a few months ago, if you try to cross the wall, you get shot.
Right.
Simple as that. Yeah. I've heard other instances. There was the Marcos. he made a mistake. He allowed teaching in TM on a big scale as well to help him, and of course people were getting more and more angry with him because he was a tin pot dictator. And
this is the Philippines, the
Philippines, and there was going to be a riot, and all the police were out, and everyone was expecting a huge conflict, and people were there doing their program. Enough teachers were there to form a Super Radiance group for Manila, anyway, the capital. Don't know about the whole Philippines, but they said it was a carnival. People were sticking flowers in the soldiers' guns, and they were all smiling and laughing and having a party. And again, his regime didn't survive the change because he couldn't change with it. He couldn't change his ways.
What would happen, for example, on a local basis? Supposing we have a troubled region of London, or a particular, a real, let's take, I think it's on your website, Liverpool went through, and it might have been Toxteth, I think, where there was the civil.
There was the riots, weren't there? Yes, Well, there was a group based in Skelmersdale, which is near Liverpool, and for some years, I don't know, about 5 or 6 years, but long enough for them to do a 5-year study of the crime rates in that area. They had the Super Radiance group for the Liverpool and surrounding areas. So there were about 120 TM SIDRs there. And if you look on the website, you see how they monitored what was going on. And crime came down fairly steadily during that 5-year period, whereas everywhere else in the UK it was going up. So the difference between the two was about 50% over a 5-year period. So it was a 50% reduction in crime as compared with the rest of the country.
Right.
So, again, it's like switching light on. You know what's going to happen. Now, I will say that the TMCDers are doing their, and it's enlivening nature's ability to sort of create coherence in the whole society. Then also what happens is not only are people less stressed as a result, it's like they're all experiencing a diluted form of meditating themselves in a way. So they're less stressed, less likely to misbehave, less likely to have aggressive thoughts and all the rest of it. But at the same time, people like the government agencies, or once or say the police or the social services or whatever, they start improving their effectiveness as well. So the SIDRs never got the credit for the reduction in crime, because what happened was, I think the police and the prisons agency and the social services and health services, they combined. They had a joint agency initiative to bring down crime by helping drug addicts and alcoholics get them off. Well, it was a fantastic idea, but it's very difficult to achieve. But they also were able to achieve it in an atmosphere that was much more coherent, and so it had that effect. So we don't get any credit for doing it, but without they wouldn't have done that, or wouldn't have done it quite so successfully.
Right. But the big study, I think, was the Washington crime study, where I think the mayor or the chief of police said the only way it's going to drop 23% is if there's 10 foot of snow or something.
That's 20. He said, it was 20%. They predicted they would try and achieve a 20% reduction in crime during the project. It was only a month long.
Right.
And the police chief scoffed at it and said, well, the only way you can do that. It was midsummer, and it gets very hot in Washington, and the crime does go up. Every summer it goes up quite dramatically. People get hotheads and do all kinds of silly things. And he said the only way you can do that is if we get 20 inches of snow. Obviously, it's not happening in Washington in the middle of July or whatever it was. And, of course it happened. But that was an interesting project. It actually, from a research point of view, it's a little bit weak, because there were far more than Super Radiance group there.
Right.
I think Washington needs about 450 people, and there were 4,000
Right.
TM Sidars there, so it covered the whole country really. But it sort of needed to, because it's the capital.
Yeah.
It's not just the capital of the United States. It's sort of an international capital as well.
Right.
And the American government are going involved in all kinds of activities across the world. So all that is part of that collective consciousness.
Right.
Sort of group effect. So they definitely need to over-egg the pudding there to make something happen.
Right.
A previous project had been carried out in Washington, and that had an effect on crime as well. That was more of a long-term one. And I know that even with that one, Marashi said, you won't do it with the Super Radiance group. You'll need to put a larger number of Sidars in there. I think there were 650 instead of 450. It's in my book.
Right.
That one, Super Radiance effect. But yeah, he recognised that you needed to cheat a little bit sometimes. Pack your cards or whatever it is.
Right.
Essentially, it's the square root of 1% under normal circumstances. But the smaller the region, I mean, if you take a town, let's say where I live, which is sort of Bournemouth area, if I was able to set a Super Radiance group up there, I think technically it needs 80 for the Super Radiance effect. But Bournemouth's very cosmopolitan, so you've got people coming and going all the time. You've got thousands of foreign students. You've also got thousands of students from the rest of the UK, and you've got visitors and tourists coming and going. So I would, like sort of 140 people there, not 70 or 80. I think, just to be safe, and make sure you get the effect. So the larger your group, the less you need to sort of overpack it, because you're having that broader and broader and broader effect.
Right.
So it's not getting too.
What happens then? Like the Rhode Island Peace Quality of Life study. What parameters do you go in? Because if you're just going to, would you say, well, let's go to Rhode Island and see what happens, or are there parameters?
The reason why they chose Rhode Island was it was I think it's the smallest state in the United States.
Right. And
they wanted a sort of self-sufficient entity that they could go to. It's what I'm trying to explain. Like, Bournemouth's part of a larger conurbation, and if you put so many Sidars there, it's so melded in with the collective consciousness of other areas that you're not sure you've got the effect. Right. Whereas Rhode Island is an entity in its own right. I think there's only about 1 million people living there, and at that time they only had enough Sidars to be able to do that number of people. So for instance, if they'd gone to New York, there's 8 million people in New York, so you wouldn't have had much of an effect. So they tried to find an area that they could show, and also it wasn't particularly troubled. They wanted to do a quality of life study, so they were looking at other things other than negative aspects. So quality of life also looks at people's health, recreational drug use, alcohol use, or whether that should go up or down, I don't know. And cigarette consumption, A&E visits, suicides, what else? But also things like patent applications, business startups, stock market indices, unemployment rates, things like that. So they look at a broad band of metrics to see what's going on.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I guess this brings us on to health. Is there any evidence that this people can have spontaneous remission? They become free from disease when there's a meditating group?
Well, the statistics show that less people get ill. But having said that, if we're talking about in the context of the coronavirus, only 2 studies involved infectious diseases. Right. We've got about 50 studies, because it wasn't thought as being particularly important. So they're just incidental. They do show a reduction in infectious disease during the course of the projects.
Right.
One was a global project. They found it very difficult getting the appropriate statistics. So they've only got statistics for the United States, but also for Australia, and both the rate of infection came down quite significantly. And you're talking about a 2 or 3 week project or something. It wasn't a long project.
No.
And then another one was a national US project, and it came down. I think one of this came down about 32% in one of the studies. What we do find is that meditators, as individuals, there was quite a powerful study done on an insurance company, a medical insurance company, back in the 80s, I think, and they had a database of 600,000 policyholders. And they were checking their database for different lifestyles to see what impact those lifestyles were having on their health costs that they were having to pay out. Obviously, they're trying to, save a bit of money. And one of the lifestyles they checked was individual policyholders who did transcendental meditation, and they discovered they had 2,000 of those on their books. So they checked those, and they found that overall, compared with the 600,000, there was a 50% reduction in medical healthcare costs. And for infectious diseases, it went down to 73%. So there was a 73% reduction in infectious diseases. So if you think that the super radiance effect seems to have a sort of diluted effect like meditation does, but on the whole population, you can imagine, right, if that's happening to an individual, then you're going to get a similar, if diluted, effect on the rest of the population. But I am speculating a bit. I mean, I'm just looking at the evidence and making an inference from that. My intention is I would love to set up a pilot study, which the government is involved with, so that they're looking at it straight away, so that they see for themselves, right, we'll get a small group somewhere where, maybe it covers 750,000 people or whatever, and we'll see then what happens compared with the rest of the country. Is the rate of infection, does it go down significantly? And is it consistent? Is it predictable? And, is it worth therefore replicating for the rest of the country? But we'll see. I have put the suggestion forward.
You have?
Funnily enough.
Have you had any joy, any response?
No.
So, I mean, all joking aside with it, if you get no response from government or any agency, is it impossible to proceed in a way that you can actually go with evidence and say, look, this is the results? Or do you really need government here just to qualify it? Well,
I would need... There's several reasons why we'd need the help. I feel that at the moment you can't have groups together anyway because of isolation rules. So you need to relax those. But also you've got to encourage people to come and do it in a group. So a lot of people don't particularly want to, I would imagine. So under normal circumstances, it would be difficult enough. Under the current circumstances, it would be very difficult. So I think they need to be paid, just like we pay our paramedics and our nurses and our doctors. Yeah. And I think that if we paid people and said, look, this is a 6-month study or a 3-month study or whatever it is, they would have to live in the same. I mean, we'd probably have to book a hotel or something like that, so put them all into one place so that they are isolated from the rest of the community. So although they're together, they're not, getting cross infections or whatever. Because we do meditation in the same room together. All the men in one room, all the women in the other. But we do sit side by side. Presumably we could sit further apart, but it's huge. Had to be a huge room. Also, we've done the research. Is there? I say we. I mean, I've not been doing the research, but different researchers and different projects all over the world, right across all different continents, over many years with different organisations, and government doesn't pay a blind bit of attention. So what's the point in doing it again? I mean that there is no point, because they're not going to really listen. So what you've got to do is get them to. I mean, Washington is a good example. John Hageley ran that one, and he did his utmost to try and grab their attention. Yeah. So that they knew it was going to happen, and then they saw it happening, and then they see the effect, and what happened? Well, nothing. They just ignored it. So circumstances are slightly different here. People are alarmed that it is difficult to cope. Societies find it very difficult to cope with this. It could easily get out of hand. It's costing the economy a huge amount. There's speculation that, oh my God, we might all go bust and so on and so forth. Lots of people are going to be unemployed. It really is a nightmare, potentially. So will this alert them to some new, novel and rather weird idea or not? And I think you have to say, right, look, you put your money in, you watch the results, and let's see what happens, and then there's no argument.
Right, yeah.
Just do it. We don't have to really understand why it happens or how it happens. You can just measure the effects before, during, and after. And after a coherence project has finished, things tend to go back to where they were. It takes a little while, but it goes back to where it was.
So what is it possible for you to describe the way the meditation is done and for how long you have to meditate?
Well, I can't describe how it's done. You've got to go and get trained. Right. But I would say in a coherence group, we call coherence group, Super Radiance group, if you're there for the purpose of trying to create an effect, you'd probably do it all day. I mean, it would be over several hours. You might have a bit of rest in the afternoon. You're there first thing in the morning until lunchtime, and then most of the afternoon. So it's serious. But I have to say, it's very enjoyable. And we do enjoy it. It's blissful. You are deeply relaxed, and you feel wonderful. So there's no particular pain or sacrifice to it.
No, I'm sure. Yeah.
It's very nice to be given the opportunity to do it. The sort of people we would have to recruit initially would all be doing it in their own homes at the moment. But it's getting them to shut down whatever it is they're doing at the moment, leaving their homes, loved ones, careers, vocations, professions, or whatever it is, upping sticks, and then coming to go to one location just for a few months and then break off again. Yeah. It's all very disruptive, and I don't, they would need to be compensated for doing that. Otherwise, they'd be doing it.
Yeah.
And there's no inclination to do it at the moment. So.
Okay, so we have to wrap this up now. So before we do, is there anything you want to leave us with, any information you want to share with us about websites or just anything that you think people can benefit from?
All right. Well, if you would like to learn more about this, my website is worldpeacegroup.org, and my book, The Super Radiance Effect, is on Amazon, either in the UK or USA or wherever you live. And it is fascinating. I've tried to make a story. It's all about the research, but I've done it in layman's terms. So I introduce TM and the background to it, and I go right the way through each project, almost in chronological order. It's like a story that's unfolding. And each one gets more and more powerful and more sophisticated. And, if you're not convinced after the first 3 or 4, then there's no hope.
No hope, exactly. Okay. Yeah. Perfect. Okay. Jeremy, thank you very much for coming along today. I'm going to share this as far and as wide as I possibly can. So,
well, my other message is, look, if you're in government, if you're working for a government agency, really take it seriously. Get in contact. I'd love to help. it's so frustrating to see all this going on, and you know you got the answer, and nobody's interested. So,
it's too easy. The answer's too easy.
It is. It is. They need to suffer. Yeah.
You've got to complicate this a lot more for people to feel as if it's going to work. Okay.